Hi guys,
Hi.
it's us, Riffin with the Rabbi, Marcia Salter, and our friend and Rabbi Ben Newman, and we are here on Israeli Independence Day, and we're going to riff a little bit on that idea, and we'll just start by asking Rabbi Ben, what does the concept of independence mean to you?
It's interesting. You're able to surprise me with the question, even though I knew the general topic. Right. So there are lots of different kinds of independence. There's an independence of a country. There's independence of individuals and their lives. The word in Hebrew for Israeli Independence Day is Yom HaAtzmaut, and Atzmaut means independence, but it's from the root for yourself, etzem, atzmi. And interestingly, the root for etzem, atzmi, yourself, is also the root for bones.
Weren't we discussing that last week?
Maybe the bones have been a theme.
Yeah.
The bones gang or whatever.
Yeah, the skin and bones gang.
Skin and bones gang.
And then I'm trying to remember the reference from the last time we did this, but you were talking about the word for bones.
It might have been the same. It might have been the same thing. I don't know. It might have been the same word.
That's because we have integrity. We come back to the
same
same ideas.
Themes, yeah.
Even no matter which door we come through, we end up the same general vicinity.
Well, I think that's an interesting thing to say about independence, right? Or the word atzmaut or etzem or atzmi is your essence is etzem, right? It's who you are. It's like who you are. Who you are. You're right, and it is the same root. It is the same root, right? That I was talking about that day. So it's your essence. It's who you are at your core. So if you go with that root, if you want to go with that root, and that root R-O-O-T or that root R-O-U-T-E, or if you want to go that route in terms of interpretation, independence means kind of being able to be your true essence, your true self, right? And then that would apply again also to the Israelites leaving Egypt, right? That they were not able to be their true selves when they were serving the Pharaoh. They were having to be somebody else. They weren't able to express their full self, their full essence, as slaves. So that's an interesting idea there.
With this independence, with this freedom, comes responsibility. Otherwise, it's kind of a free-for-all with no rules, and that can't really work very well.
Right. I think an interesting distinction that needs to be made is that it says avadim hayinu, we were slaves in Egypt, and the same word is used to say what we are to God. We are Avdei Hashem, or Eved Hashem. And Eved Hashem is somebody who is a servant to God. But the word Eved means servant, but it also means slave. Right? So part of what the story of the Exodus is getting at is to not be a slave or a servant to any human being, right? Or any individual. And they have the same theme in the Torah of like about the land, like no person can actually own the land. Like God owns all of the land, right? And no person can actually be your ruler because God is our ruler. And now we can take it back to like, well, what is God? And we can talk about Manny's idea of God and Rabbi Emmanuel Goldsmith's idea of God, and the idea of God as being sort of these higher ideals and values, right? And to say that you're a slave or a servant of those higher ideals and values, right?
Well, that's a wonderful concept,
right? And so that way, there are limits there, right? It's not like, oh, free for all. I get to just be myself and go party and be hedonistic and have my own self-centered, experiences of myself, right? It's more like, well, I'm free to follow these ideals.
Goodness,
I'm free,
kindness, justice.
right? Truth, beauty, and goodness, right? And so I like that, as a way of saying, yes, you're free, but like you said, with freedom comes responsibility that we have to express. And now here the riffing is going on in my head. Right? So I'm a big comic book fan. As you can tell, like I always wear comic book T-shirts and stuff. So there's a great line from Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man comic, when he, right after he first gets his powers from his uncle, where he says to him, "With great power comes great responsibility." Do you know the story of Spider-Man at all?
Tell us.
So Spider-Man is a boy named Peter Parker, and he gets bitten by a radioactive spider, and he wakes up and he has all of these fantastic powers, like crawling on walls and super strength, and he decides what he's going to do with that super strength is enter a wrestling competition where the prize is $500 so that he can buy a car.
About how old is he when this is happening?
Probably 17, something like that.
Okay.
And he enters it, and he enters as the Spider-Man, and he puts on a balaclava, one of those ski masks things, and a red one, and he goes and he enters the contest and he wins, and the owner of the wrestling competition stiffs him for the money and says, "Oh, I'm only going to give you like $100 or something like that. I don't know exactly." And he gets so angry and he leaves. And as he's leaving, there's another man who had just walked into the office of the wrestling competition, and he was a thief, and he had just robbed the owner of the wrestling competition. He was running right past Peter Parker down the hallway, and the owner of the wrestling competition says, "Stop that guy! Stop him!" And he goes, "Well, it's not my problem," because he's angry at the guy who just stiffed him, so he doesn't stop the robber. The robber escapes. He could have tripped him, he could have done anything. He doesn't stop him. The robber escapes, and it turns out Peter Parker's uncle, who's waiting outside to pick him up from the wrestling competition, ends up getting in the way of the robber, and the robber ends up killing Peter Parker's uncle. And so he learns this lesson, like, with great power comes great responsibility, and that, even when you think somebody stiffed you or you're angry, you should still stand up for what's right and what's good.
Right, but then do the wrong thing, but you should do the right thing.
You should do the right thing. Even if a million people are doing the wrong thing, you still have to do the right thing.
Exactly. Sounds like something your mother would say. Well, if they all jumped off the roof, would you jump too?
Well, I was going to say it sounds like a Jewish story, or a Hasidic story. Although Stan Lee, who created Spider-Man, was Jewish. So, a lot of these superhero stories have at their roots very sort of Jewish themes.
So did he not want to have superpowers in the beginning, or did he completely embrace having superpowers?
Well, he embraced them, but he didn't get that he actually had a responsibility to help people.
I see.
At first he was just using them for his own selfish purposes, and he didn't realize that when you have that sort of a gift, it's your responsibility to use it for the good. I think that's a lesson that all of us can take in our lives, right? That when we have gifts, we shouldn't use our gifts for evil. I shouldn't use my music for evil, or if you could use music for evil or whatever. But and so now let's bring it back around, right, to Israel, right? So Israel is this amazing place.
And the
right?
name means
Yisrael, to struggle with God, right? To struggle with the divine.
And Rabbi Manny would say to struggle with good.
Right, to struggle with goodness, to struggle with these higher ideals that we have, and I think as a country, Israel is amazing, right? In terms of in the Middle East, it's the only real democracy in the Middle East. It stands up for all these higher ideals that some of the countries, many of the countries in the Middle East don't stand up for, and yet they still have work to do.
We all do.
As we all do, but I think at its core, Israel gets the idea that with this great power, meaning we have this power, we're now a state, comes great responsibility. I think that's one thing that the Jewish people are learning in this last couple of generations since Israel has existed, is how to be a power, right? How to be a nation, because for generations and generations, Jewish people were just, stateless, wanderers, and we were always sort of the oppressed, we were always the people who were on the margins, of society, or didn't have power in a society. Although, sometimes we would get close to the non-Jewish leaders and get influence, but for many generations, we didn't have this sort of power that a nation has. So I think part of what we're doing in this modern day, or what Israel's doing, is grappling with this idea of how can we maintain all our ideals that we've developed through the diaspora, right? And at the same time have this great power of being a nation. I was thinking the other day about one of my first trips to Israel, and I remember sitting on the beach, and I was thinking, oh, this is so beautiful, and I looked down and there was trash on the beach. There was like old tin cans and plastic bags, and I thought, like, this is God's land. Like, it's true about all land. Like, we should never litter, right? But like, even more so, it just hit me, like, this is like this holy place, and we're like throwing our trash on the ground. And so again, like, it's like we've been given this great power, and we have the responsibility to keep it clean, right? We have the responsibility to make sure that it's maintained for many generations. But it's not just Israel, right? You could say that about any land, right? You say that about our land here in America. We have this great power. We have this great gift, and we regularly, harm the environment and do all sorts of things that maybe aren't the right thing to do with that power.
Well, as Rabbi Manny would say, when you see the word holy, think ethical.
Right.
And where it says be holy for your God, be ethical for your God. And the idea, I just, what ran through my mind, okay, we have responsibilities. Does God have any?
Does God have responsibility towards us?
Just I don't know, the question just...
Well, it depends on what your view of God is, right? I mean, right, if God is these higher ideals, it doesn't have any agency, right? I mean, the ideals themselves can't have... They are responsibility, right? They don't have...
That's true, and that would be more of the God that's on the throne, which Rabbi Manny would say, we're talking about concepts more than an actual person.
Right, although, right, I mean, that question has been grappled with anyway, right? There's a great story from Elie Wiesel. It's called The Trial of God. I think it's actually a play that he wrote, based on a true story. They were in a concentration camp, and a bunch of rabbis got together to put God on trial for the Holocaust. And they have this whole trial for God, and in the end, they find God guilty. And then they say, okay, now let's go pray.
Jeez, but I always, to me, someone or an entity, a power, a force, who had the ability to stop evil from happening, but sat back and didn't do it, how could that be worthy of worship?
Right. I mean, it's problematic. It's definitely problematic. Right? And you have, you have all the way back to stories from the Torah, like Abraham arguing with God about saving Sodom and Gomorrah if there are 10 righteous people. There are stories from Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev about people saying having to forgive God for creating all of these horrible atrocities in the world or allowing them to happen.
But then Rabbi Manning would say,
right, God has nothing to do with
right,
it. Right? And that's what Mordecai Kaplan would say too. God has nothing to do with evil. There's another view of God that you could take as God as sort of being wholly removed and transcendent, right? Like that God is sort of beyond the world. This goes back to the book of Job. So in the story of Job, right? Job is this very righteous guy. He prays every day. He does all this great stuff. And the Satan, the accuser, comes to God. And God says, oh, have you seen my servant Job, how great he is? And Satan says, well, if you took away everything that he had, he wouldn't be so great.
Always scheming.
Right. So they have this, they make this bet, basically, like in the movie Trading Places. Do you remember that movie
Yes.
with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd? Right. And they make this bet that he's going to lose his faith, and they take away everything from him. Right. They kill his children. They destroy his house. They give him boils. Horrible,
Not nice guys.
horrible things. Right.
Not nice.
And this is coming from God. Right. And he starts to argue, what did I do wrong? I didn't do anything to deserve this. And he has these friends come to him and they say, you must have done something to deserve this, right? And no, I've never done anything. And then God appears to him at the end of the book from a whirlwind. And God gives him this speech. He says, Mizeh machshich etzah b'milim bli dat. Who is this who darkens counsel through words without wisdom? And then he says, were you there when I created the universe? Are you there when I move the stars around their orbit? Are you there when I'm in the depths of the sea making things happen? You don't get it, Job. And it's sort of this moment of God saying, I'm so transcendent. I'm concerned with all these other big things. You think I should be concerned with your pain? And there's all these answers to like what this speech from the whirlwind means. But there's a great one from Carl Jung. He writes sort of a little book called Jung's Response to Job, or something like that. And he basically says God is revealing that God is so removed from the world, like so transcendent and so beyond and so like beyond like infinite, so concerned with such bigger things that God doesn't understand what it's like to be a mortal human being, and to suffer and to have pain and to be finite and to die. Right? That God is sort of doesn't get it. Right? God ultimately doesn't get what it's like to be a mortal human being.
It's like being in the 1%.
In a certain sense, right? Like, well, God is in the
beyond
the infinite 1%,
exactly.
and I would say, that's sort of a way that we could look at it too, right? And is that God is so beyond the human world and the human understanding that God doesn't get it, that God can't get it. That God can't relate to what it's like to be a human being and to suffer. So God doesn't solve all those problems because God is sort of beyond all those problems. So, there are other views of God too, right? There's what's called the Shekhinah, which is the feminine presence of God in the world, right? Which is, she suffers with us and she goes with us into exile. And there's all these texts that say when a person says my arm hurts, the Shekhinah says my arm hurts. That it's sort of the aspect of God that is able to feel our pain, but yet she's not able to do anything about it. Also, in a way.
Well, then I guess we better get to work. She's in
exile too, right? So it's our job, right?
On back to Aleinu.
Right, back to Aleinu. It's our job to create that truth, beauty, and goodness, and bring it into the world. But there's another thing that Manny used to say, when we would say the morning blessings on Saturday morning, and we'd say, blessed are you, God, who feeds the hungry, clothes the naked, and he'd say, and Manny would say, whenever it says that, it means that's what you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Right? That's what you're supposed to do, and that whole purpose of prayer is to remind us that we're supposed to do all of these things. And back to Spider-Man, right? Like, God is like the ultimate superhero, right? Like God has all of this power, right? And in a way, we fashion ourselves after God, right? We want to be like God and have this power, but also the responsibility.
Well, it's time for a song.
All right, let's do it.
I love
this
these
is from
conversations.
R.A. Einstein.
Okay.
אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה אז יבואו כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה ננסה מן ההתחלה. יהיה לנו רע, זה לא נורא. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. That's from R.A. Einstein. The words mean, it's up to you and me to change the world.
And I guess that's we keep coming back to that.
We do.
Aleinu. And as for evil in the world, a gentleman gave a talk once at Mavak Shederik, and he said that we should be so busy trying to get rid of evil in the world that we shouldn't worry about where it's coming from, because if we work to wipe it out, we'll get to its source eventually. So, Aleinu, guys.
And Shtibel Havdalah is this Saturday, 6:15 p.m., May 6th, 6:15 p.m. to 8:15 p.m., 55 Cedar Street, Zion Episcopal Church. Hope to see you there.
Thanks.